Welcome, everyone, to Winning with Effective Behavior Management Virtually, brought to you by the Garland ISD Student Services Behavior Program Specialist. Today, our session objectives will be to understand the difference between Stoic and Champs, and also you will learn how to structure your classroom for success, teach classroom expectations, observe your students systematically, interact positively, correct your students calmly. The norms for today will be to be present, get comfortable, take notes and gain ideas to start the school year, contact your support when needed, and also please keep in mind as we move through the presentation that it is for all age groups. You will need to take an example and transfer the situation to other situations that have meaning to you. First, let's begin with two different words that you will need to know. The first is Stoic. It is an acronym for the variables that effective teachers utilize in classroom management. Champs is a visual representation for teaching expectations within the T of the Stoic framework. We will begin with structuring your classroom for success. Why is structure necessary? Let me give you an example. The airport is always a place that has to have a lot of structure. It must have structure where people feel safe, everyone must be aware of rules and expectations, and there is predictability. Safety, knowing what is expected, and a level of predictability are the three things that students want from adults. Since March, our world has become more structured. These should look familiar to you by now. These signs and the directions have helped us add structure and to help us know the expectations. Thinking of structure you have seen lately, how would you design a classroom? Sure, you would want to use an appropriate desk arrangement, posters, books, manipulatives, and other technology to provide visual structure to your classroom. In a virtual classroom, first, good lighting is very necessary. Your students need to be able to see you. A professional background that includes items that will help you teach or further your students' understanding will assist you with creating an educational work environment. Make sure you reduce all distractions. Learn ways to use technology and try things outside your comfort level. It is important for your virtual or physical classroom to look appealing and structured. It promotes positive emotions, increases motivation, and enhances learning, which altogether improves behaviors. Before we go any further, let me introduce you to the virtual classroom of students we will visit with today. You have a student that brings her family to class, another student going to the restroom and never returning, which is maybe better than going with the camera on. These students are excited to see us and want to show you what their house looks like and things that are important to them. They also want to see your house, your pets. So definitely structure is going to be needed so that you can meet everyone's need. Did anyone notice the student in the middle? This student looks like they may need some attention. After physical structure is put in place, there are other pieces of structure that are needed. Let's go back to the airport scenario. Look at the similarities that an airport and a virtual classroom have in common. They both have the other necessary pieces. One necessary piece is posted schedules. Verbal and posted directions as well as expectations is also a necessity to keep people safe. Both entities are expected to move large groups through their process, or for virtual teachers, you may have a large class. The skill level of the participants are at different levels while moving through the process. For example, non-readers may need pictures instead of words. Someone who has never had the experience before may need directions repeated to them. Set up your classroom with a schedule. Your schedule may change 1,000 times, but it is going to be important to refer parents and students to a schedule and update them with changes. This lets your students know what is expected for the lesson. Often we make a mistake that students will just know, but we all like to know what to expect. Have you ever been in a presentation and wondered when you were going to have lunch or what you were going to do next? Letting students know the schedule for the class or day will reduce anxiety and allow students to focus more and engage with your lesson. Think about sharing the schedule prior to starting the lesson. Both students and other family members will have clear expectations in advance of the day's lessons and events. Think about your schedule. What variable can you adjust to change student behavior? How might it affect the behavior of the student's family members? How might a time break with advance notification change the behavior of the student that went to the restroom and never came back? Your students will need and want to know what is expected, both behaviorally and academically. They do not want rules to change based on adult moods. Students want and need consistency. Students need to know what the expectation and rules are for the class. Rules never vary. For example, you may have a rule about never using profanity in the chat box. That rule will never change. Expectations may change based on the activity, lesson, or environment. For example, with virtual learning, a lesson may be direct instruction or to break out into groups. Expectations for each are different. Students need to know verbally and visually each time they change. This increases your chance for compliance, whether it is virtual learning or in-person learning. Even virtual classrooms need expectations, and they need to be explicitly taught and posted at every grade level. Posting and teaching expectations does not guarantee that all people follow them. However, they do increase the chances that the majority of the people will follow the expectations. Do you always drive 60 miles per hour? Do we always hope food service employees wash their hands? Have you ever walked up to a store without your mask and needed to turn around? Are there times when you do not follow every expectation and bend the rules? Good people will push the limits. Posting and explicitly teaching expectations increases the chance for compliance. Remember, at the beginning of the presentation, we posted and discussed norms or expectations for today. Although you are all adults, it is important that you know what to expect and what we expect of you. This is an example of simply changing the wording. It relays the same expectations for younger students. We will talk more about teaching expectations later, but you have to do more than say them one time or just simply post them. Just keep in mind, it's going to be 5 days a week thing. This slide shows 2 examples on how to post and use a visual to discuss expectations. What rules and expectations would you set for this class? Once we have physical structure and expectations, we need to think of procedures and routines. Procedures are what we want the students to do. This then becomes a routine because the students learn to do it automatically. For example, every day when your students join you in your classroom, you may have a question to determine how everyone is feeling that day. It may be something like, use an emoji to let me know how you are feeling today. Another day, it might be, in 5 words or less, let me know what you are looking forward to today. Even though the question changes, the students know the procedure is to answer the question because you have spent the first several days of school teaching, practicing, and discussing this procedure until it becomes a routine. We also know that it could be day 25 or 53, and you may have to review the procedure once again, especially after a holiday. Think of it this way. All of us as adults have walked out of a building and forgot where we parked the car. It happens. Although you may park in the same spot each day, a stressor may cause you to momentarily forget. Kids have been stressful lives, and it happens to them as well. Is that too many mistakes all in one? In a physical classroom, you may teach students to enter the classroom and begin working. So what would the same routine look like virtually? You would greet them by name, share a positive comment, and direct them to the first activity. The entry activity could be shared on the screen as they log in. Definitely think about what they may need to know and plan ahead. This will save you time and energy later. So using our virtual classroom, would this class benefit from knowing some procedures and routines? Do you have a check-in procedure? Maybe even a procedure for finding a quiet workspace before logging on. Next, we are going to begin talking about teaching expectations. A picture of a front loader is used in this because that is exactly what needs to happen so you can get the behavior and academics that you want from your students. This means if you do a lot of work at the beginning, then it doesn't take that much work later. It becomes a routine. It will take you teaching expected behavior directly and students practicing so they become fluent, just like when students are learning math facts or learning to read. Good. Benefits of front loading. It keeps things predictable. It reduces referrals. It improves social and emotional health. It increases academic instruction. And it increases learning time. You saw the slide earlier. We posted it and discussed it as a class. Now we will need to teach it. How do we do that, plus everything else we need to teach? Keep in mind, if you front load, meaning spend time in the beginning teaching the expectations, then you will get to spend more time teaching academics later. Let's look at the how. Even virtually, you can teach behavioral expectations. Basically, this slide gives ideas on how to teach the behavior you want. You will want to use modeling, describing and practicing what it looks like as well. It does not matter if you teach pre-K or seniors, they all need to practice. For example, all grade levels may need to practice how to raise their hands. For high school students, it may be appropriate for them to use an emoji, but for younger students, they may need to physically raise their hand. Let's go back to the airline analogy. How does a flight attendant teach you to buckle your seatbelts? The flight attendants demonstrate and model. Even if you fly 25 or over 100 times, you will hear the same set of directions, and they model it at the same time. If you answered with the answers above, they are correct. Let's take a moment to look at each of these a little closer. And then I have. This is an example of the teacher modeling what listening may look like. She could also ask students to model. Other possibilities for a modeling activity may include finding pictures, taking pictures, asking students to describe or tell what paying attention means to them, finding a funny video clip, or having a guest speaker model. This slide is about practicing. The teacher explains how to move to a breakout room and demonstrates. Then a practice session follows. During the practice session, the teacher assists students in need of help. The teacher will determine if the practice was successful enough to move on or if the students need a reteach and another practice session. Practicing is something that can be done quickly and be part of pre-teaching. It's imperative to do so because you will lose important instructional time. This is an example of looks like, sounds like. This can easily be done with a T-chart, modeling, and practicing. Take a few moments to look at these ideas you can use to create an activity to teach your expectations. Next, we will discuss observing systematically. Let's go back to the airline analogy again. Do flight attendants just assume you buckle up? And then, no, they observe systematically. They walk down the aisle purposely looking at each person for compliance. Multitasking is imperative when teaching. You must constantly teach and scan students for understanding and compliance. How do you do this virtually? Some ways of doing this would be to have two screens or use an iPhone. What are we looking for? Well, we are looking for who is meeting or who is not meeting the expectations. Why are some experiencing success and others are struggling? Are your students understanding what we want from them? Returning to our virtual class, what observations can you make? What adjustments do you need to make? Now we will move to the next variable in STOIC, interacting positively. Interactions that promote a successful classroom include positive feedback, non-contingent positive interaction, contingent interaction, and providing opportunities to respond. Keep in mind, feedback is what is said. Positive interaction is the timing of what is said and paying attention to students showing the correct behavior. Ask yourself, do you interact more frequently with students that are engaged in positive behavior than when the students are engaged in negative behavior? Think about that. Do you find yourself addressing students more when they are on task and behaving? Or do you address them more when they are off task and misbehaving? We hope your answer is when they are behaving. Interacting when students are meeting expectations is the cheapest and easiest way to get the desired behavior you want from your students. Are you interacting with them when they are engaged in positive behavior? Let's go back to the airline analogy. The flight attendants demonstrate and model, but let's think about their feedback. It is specific and descriptive. It's immediate and contingent on passengers doing what is expected, and it makes the passengers feel good. Let's take a look at an example from our virtual classroom. Taylor is in class listening. She is nodding her head and looking into the camera. The teacher then says, "Taylor, I like the way you're listening by looking in the camera and nodding your head." The feedback describes what the teacher observed. It was immediately given when the teacher observed the behavior and delivered while Taylor was still meeting the expectation. How do you think Taylor felt? How do you think it impacts other students in the class? The interaction with Taylor is a positive interaction. If the child is demonstrating the correct behavior, it is a positive interaction. But what if Taylor is not listening? And the teacher says, "Taylor, I noticed you are wearing a new hat today." Although the teacher says something positive and nice to Taylor, it is a negative interaction because of what Taylor was doing. Taylor was not paying attention. Therefore, the interaction was negative. Even if you are saying something nice, but the child is not doing the correct behavior, it is not considered a positive interaction. Another way of providing positive feedback is using group contingency ideas. One of them being, use the praise around strategy to get students on track. You praise the students that are showing expected behavior all around your classroom to encourage the student that is not behaviorally on track. Another is a group contingency game in which students earn points. This will use positive peer pressure to encourage students to meet behavioral expectations. Praise is powerful. This slide are the numbers you need to remember for the ratio of interaction. Every time you correct a student for not meeting an expectation, you need to deliver 5 positives. Students that have experienced trauma need significantly more positive interaction. We need to expect that all of our students have experienced trauma just based on recent events. Ratio of interaction tips. Some of them are: give yourself a visual reminder, provide pre-corrections, ensure students know expectations, give nonverbal gestures, publicly post work, show interest during independent work periods, ask students to help. Opportunities to respond is an easy and cheap way to keep students behaviorally on track and academically engaged. On your handout, there is a great video link we highly encourage you to watch. Anita Archer shows how to establish behavioral expectations while giving students multiple opportunities to respond to keep them engaged in the lesson. On this slide are 2 ideas to keep students engaged and respond to your lesson. Students give thumbs up or thumbs down or lay their hand flat to indicate they are not sure. Emojis can also be used to represent the same thing. The second idea shown is for students to hold up cards indicating the answers yes or no. Additional ideas are to have students write 4 common words that you will use during the lesson in the corners of the paper. Students then can hold up their paper and point to the answer. The important thing to remember is for the students to have plenty of opportunities to engage with the lesson. The last variable we will discuss is correcting students calmly. Correction is the least powerful variable we will have in changing behavior. Focusing on the stoic variables of structure, teach, observe, and interact will help you be more proactive with the student management and not need to rely as much on correction, which is reactive. Being determined to help students become behaviorally successful will take drive and grit to get you through the year. Connecting with students and building relationships is the most powerful, easy, and cheapest behavior management strategy you have. Students need to feel connected to their teacher and need to feel that you are there for them and will be fair. Using the phrase front-loading implies to making connections over correction. Front-load early with making the connections, and then when it is time to make the correction, you will be more successful. When correcting fluently, remember to pre-plan responses. Evaluate if the target behavior decreases. Correction effort should address the cause. It will also be important for you to give the student time and space. Any correction procedure you choose to do should be done consistently and be given time to be effective. Typically, you need a couple of weeks with consistent intervention to determine its effectiveness. How would this flight attendant correct someone for not having their seatbelt buckled? This flight attendant would restate the directive privately, quietly, and calmly. But what if they refuse? You have to do something, so use a strategy. Use a strategy you are most likely to use with fidelity and consistency. Establish a bank of corrections you will use. As stated earlier, the strategy itself is not as important as using a strategy with consistency and fidelity. Talk to your team. Think about what works best for you. Take some time now to read the list. Come up with a few ideas that work for you. The acronym STOIC and CHAMPS are key variables to remember for effective classroom management, both virtually and once in the building. Student management is essential for your students' academic growth. Welcome to Garland ISD, and know that you have a large support group and support personnel to help you be successful in your classroom. We are excited to work with you as you make your differences in students' lives here in Garland. Thank you. Please feel free to reach out to your Garland ISD Behavior Program Specialist throughout the year should you need more support.